Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about libraries. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, why doesn't my company use a JavaScript library for all our projects? We're reinventing the wheel always, like what React.js does or carousel library or the carousel library does. So if I understood you correctly, the question basically is, why are you remaking like a library such as React JS or like a carousel library, something like that, instead of just using something that is already done? So this is where the philosophers of your company have reached. They have an inclination towards doing everything themselves and owning all their own code, and they take that to the absolute extreme usually. So this is where it becomes a little bit dangerous for companies, because on average, when you have semi-talented software developers, or they are talented, it's just that they don't usually have the maturity to make good informed decisions on behalf of the company. They're philosophers, as I like to call them. They are more about experimenting and following their own ideals rather than producing results and good solutions. And they usually come in many shapes and forms. Some are like, no coders, like everything should be like a third-party library because they're tool freaks, like they're tool fetish. They have a fetish for toolings, and so they swarm your project, especially in JavaScript land, with tons of different libraries and third-party solutions and so forth. Then you have this version, which is like no dependencies whatsoever, where you write everything from scratch because it's better that way we can control everything. Then you have the abstraction gurus, so it's like everything needs to be a wrapper or an adapter around a third-party library, because if we transition from this tool to another tool, we should be able to do that seamlessly. Then you have like people who are like hell-bent on that everything should be optimized towards testability and process. There are tons of different types of people who have like these very extreme views on how to deliver software effectively, and your version seems to be the people who believe that there is no value in having a third-party library. It should better if we write it ourselves. And so the way that I usually try to coach people into thinking when it comes to software development is, it's actually funny because I read the other day, I think it was, I can't remember now if it was one of the founders of Google or something like that, that said that good software developers think as investors. And I could not agree more with that statement, because basically what you're doing when you're trying to build software is very similar to how you run a business or anything like that. You are usually better off thinking in terms of how much will it cost me to do this thing versus how much will I get from the thing, than you are saying that you're following basically a religious doctrine saying that you should always, I don't know, do your own implementation, etc., etc. Because the reality, the nuances of when it's a good idea to rewrite a library yourself versus using a third party is very difficult to grasp without having a more holistic understanding of how do you get value and what are the consequences of the choices that you are making. Because only an extremist would say, we will follow this doctrine under all circumstances, because if you do that, you by definition will not consider the impact, like the outcomes of following this doctrine, because the doctrine is the thing that is in focus, not the value that you are bringing. Nobody ever has ever looked at like these sorts of philosophical or like idealistic ideas as a means to objectively get value in all areas. It's about a very specific viewpoint. So if an example, as I was saying, the viewpoint here is, if we write all of our own code, we will be better off than if we ever use a third-party library. And that is a very extreme view. So, for example, as you were saying, if you're gonna opt out of React.js, and you're still gonna build something that fits the use case of React.js, then you're basically forced to reinvent React. or some other, like you're going to have to reinvent something. And the only time that's going to make sense to you is if React doesn't give you what you need, or like it doesn't matter if it's React or something else, right? But it doesn't give you what you need, or you need something very small, very simple, that where React is maybe overkill, like the investment into setting React up is bigger than the value you're going to get from just doing something simpler yourselves. And the same thing goes for the carousel libraries. So, because what you're in essence doing is that you're just basically reinventing the same thing somebody else has invented. And if you can get that, and it's low, like there is no risk, you can basically offload the responsibility of creating this third-party library to somebody else. That is a very good thing, assuming now that it is a stable and good investment for you. It is, as I said, it's a little bit like the stock market. If you know that a stock is very stable and very safe to bet on, then you can invest into that thing with very little risk, because you know you have done your homework. It's very unlikely that this thing is going to cause you any sorts of problems. But on the other hand, if you are, as I was saying, the opposite, where you're like third-party librarying everything, the odds of you creating a situation where you have a lot of dependencies that may not play so nice with each other, or where you need to make an unforeseen change to the way the application is working, well, now it's becoming a bit of a problem. An example would be if you're using React, let's say that you decided to use Material UI, the library for visual components. If you do use that, it's the same thing I tell people with Bootstrap or something like that. If you make that sort of decision, you are creating a third-party dependency to a library that has an opinion on how, for example, your application is going to look. And the cost, depending on how much customization needs you have on the user interface, is actually going to be pretty high for you, because it might be that you have to restyle all of these components or redesign them and so forth. And so it might have been more prudent for you to just define your own custom components and style them like in the way that whoever is doing your designs wanted them to be styled. And the same thing goes for, say, a carousel. A classic one is that you have a carousel or something like that which works in a certain way, and then the designers come in and they say they want a slightly different sort of animation that is very specific, and you can't accommodate it because the carousel library that you are using does not support the functionality that you are looking for. And now you have already made that investment. So if you think about it as an investment terms, you have lost money on this because you have invested and now you have to undo it and redo it again. But this is where, as I said, this is where it becomes very difficult, because for you to be able to make good, prudent investments, you have to be able, or rather you basically need the experience to know what are good libraries to invest in, third-party libraries, and what are not so good libraries to invest in. And as you can imagine, that comes with fucking up many times over. And the only general rule of thumb I can give you that helps you with thinking about this sort of stuff is that if you have a need, when you understand exactly the sort of application you're trying to build, and you understand what solutions the tools that you are going for actually provide, and the potential risk with investing in something, when you understand that picture, it becomes easy for you to bet on something. So as an example, if you're going to make an SPA, using React is a very good idea, because it will save you a lot of time. It will create a stable foundation for you to build on top of. But if you then see that you have a design that is very custom, then using Bootstrap may not be a good idea, or using Material UI may not be a very good idea. That sort of thinking is the thing that usually I promote. So what I want you to take away from this is that usually when a company doesn't want to use any type of libraries, even the big, very established ones that practically everybody is using, it is due to that you have a philosopher in your ranks, a person who believes that all dependencies are bad and you should write everything yourself. And as a rule of thumb, it is good for you to not use too many of these tiny little nice to have libraries, like some of the things that you could get on, like basically NPM for is everything from using a fancier version of the Flux pattern, or using something like a CSS framework, etc., etc. It's all down to, do you understand your use case? Do you understand the sort of investments you're making into what type of system into what system you are building? So if you have, as I said, done your homework and you've realized that, hey, I'm going to make an SPA, well, then using React is a perfectly fine thing to do. But maybe if you were making a very simple static website, it would not have been a good idea to use React because it's simply not the use case for this specific tool, so it's a bad investment for your needs. Same thing with CSS or whatever you might be doing. If you have a lot of customization requirements, maybe using Bootstrap out of the box isn't the best idea, because the value you get from it is in basically most of the styles are done for you. But if you have to undo almost everything, then it's not a good investment. So this whole thing is always going, this is the seniority that's going to do most of the heavy lifting for you after a while of working. You're going to be able to tell how one library can in one circumstance be a very good investment, and in another situation it might not be such a good investment. It all comes down to your understanding of the problems that you are solving and the libraries that are available to you. Because I can promise you guys, this idea that you should prioritize third parties or you should prioritize writing everything yourself, it's always a balancing game, and anybody who is very extreme here usually ends up causing a lot of problems for companies. Have a great day.